Today we are going to learn a new story titled as The Best Investment I Ever Made. The writer of this story is A.J. Cronin. He is very famous. A.J. Cronin, MD, DPH, MRCP, was born in 1896 and died in 1981. He was a Scottish novelist and a physician. He is a doctor. His career as a novelist started in 1930 when he was designated with a chronic ulcer and was compelled to take 6 months complete rest. During this time, he was able to indulge in his lifelong desire to write a novel, having previously written nothing but prescriptions and scientific papers. His first novel was Hatter's Castle, and the most popular being The Citadel. Many of his stories have been adapted to Hollywood movies. So that man is very famous. He is by profession he is a doctor, by passion he is a writer. So most of the stories became the stories of many of the Hollywood films. So let's read and understand what is the content of this story. Actually, the story begins without any introduction or any previous connections. It directly enters into the story. On the second day out from New York, while making the round of the promenade deck, I suddenly became aware that one of the passengers was watching me closely, following me with his gaze every time I passed. I wanted to rest to avoid the tedium of casual and importunate shipboard contacts. I gave no sign of having noticed the man. Yet there was nothing importunate about him. On the contrary, he seemed affected by a troubled, rather touching diffidence. He was in his early 40s, rather short in build, with a fair complexion and clear blue eyes. His thin hair had begun to recede from his forehead. His dark suit, somber tie, and rimless spectacles gave evidence of a serious and reserved disposition. At this point, the bugle sounded for dinner and I went below. On the following afternoon, I again observed my fellow voyager watching me earnestly from his deck chair. Now a lady was with him, obviously his wife. The situation by this time had begun to intrigue me. I discovered from my steward that there were Mr. and Mrs. John S. from a small suburb of London. When another day passed without event, I began to feel certain that Mr. S. would remain too shy to carry out his obvious desire to approach me. How, on our final evening at sea, Mrs. S. decided the matter. With a firm pressure on his hand and a whispered word in his ear, she urged her husband towards me as I passed along the deck. "Excuse me, doctor, I wonder if I might introduce myself." He spoke almost breathlessly, offering me the visiting card he held in his hand and studying my face to see if the name meant anything to me. Then, as it plainly did not, he went on with the same awkwardness. If you could spare a few minutes, my wife and I would like to have a word with you. A moment later, I was occupying the vacant chair beside them. Haltingly, he told me that this had been their first visit to America. It was not entirely a holiday trip. They had been making a tour of the New England states, inspecting many of the summer recreational camps for young people there. Afterwards, they had visited settlement houses in New York and other cities to study the methods employed in dealing with cases of backward, maladjusted and delinquent youth. Okay, it's not a delinquent, it's delinquent. Okay, delinquent youth. There was in his voice and manner, indeed in his whole personality, a genuine enthusiasm that was disarming. I found myself liking him instinctively. Questioning him further, I learned that he and his wife had been active for the past 15 years in the field of youth welfare. He was by profession a solicitor, but in addition to his practice at the courts, found time to act as director of a charitable organization devoted to the care of boys and girls, mostly from city slums, who had fallen under the ban of the law. As I spoke with real feeling, I got a vivid picture of the work these two people were doing. I learned how they took derelict adolescents from the juvenile courts and, placing them in a healthy environment, healed them in mind and body and sent them back into the world. They were given training in a useful handicraft which made them fit to take their place as worthy members of the community. It was a work of redemption that stirred the heart, and I asked what had directed his life into this channel. The question had a strange effect upon him. He took a sharp breath and exclaimed, "Oh, you still do not remember me?" I shook my head. To my best of my belief, I had never in my life seen him before. "I have wanted to get in touch with you for many years," he went on, under increasing stress. "But I was never able to bring myself to do so." Then, bending near, he spoke a few words tensely in my ear. At that, slowly the veils parted. My thoughts sped back a quarter of a century, and with a start, I remembered the solemn occasion when I had seen this man before. I was a young doctor at the time and had just set up a practice in a working class district of London. On a foggy November night, towards 1 o'clock, I was awakened by a loud banging on the door. Hurriedly, I threw on some clothes and went downstairs. It was a sergeant of police, in dripping helmet and cape, mistily outlined on the doorstep. "A suicide case," he told me abruptly. " 'In the lodgings around the corner. I had come at once.' We walked the short distance in silence, even our footsteps muffled by the fog, and turned into the narrow entrance of an old building. As we mounted the creaking staircase, my nostrils were stung by the sick source odor of illuminating gas. On the upper story, the agitated landlady showed us to a bare little attic where, stretched on a narrow bed, lay the body of a young man. Although apparently lifeless, there remained the barest chance that the youth was not quite beyond recall. With the sergeant's help, I began the work of resuscitation. For an entire hour, we labored without success. Despite our most strenuous exertions, it appeared useless. Then, as we were about to give up, completely exhausted, there broke from the patient a shallow, convulsive gasp. Half an hour of redoubled efforts, and we had the youth sitting up, gazing at us dazedly. Slowly, he seemed to be realizing the horror of his situation. As he gained his strength, he told us his story. His parents were dead. An uncle had found him a position as clerk in a London solicitor's office. He had been in the city only 6 months. Utterly friendless, he had fallen victim to the loose society of the streets, had made bad companions, and like a young fool, eager to taste pleasure far beyond his means, had begun to bet on horses. Soon he had lost all his small savings, had pledged his belongings, and owed the bookmaker a disastrous amount. In an effort to recoup, he had taken a sum of money from the office safe for a final gamble that he was assured was certain to win. But this last resort had failed. Terrified of the prosecution that must follow, sick at heart, sunk in despair, he had shut himself in his room and turned on the gas. A long bar of silence throbbed in the little attic when he concluded this halting confession. Then gruffly, the sergeant asked how much he had stolen. £7 10 shillings. £7 10 shillings. The answer sounded pitiful. For this paltry sum, for this very small sum, he had almost thrown away his life. There was a pause. The three of us, the sergeant, the landlady, and me, as the sole witnesses of this near tragedy, had the same unspoken thought in our minds. We decided to give the young man a fresh start. The sergeant, at considerable risk to his job, resolved to make no report upon the case so that no court proceedings would result. The landlady offered a month's free board until he should get upon his feet again, while I, making perhaps the least contribution, came forward with £7 10 shillings for him to put back in the office safe. This is what happened. The ship moved on through the still darkness of the night. There was no need of speech. With a tender gesture, Mrs. S. had taken her husband's hand, and as we sat in silence, I could not but reflect that it was the best investment I had made in my life. That £7 and 10 shillings is the biggest, best investment in his life. It had paid me no dividends in worldly goods, but had turned out to be immensely profitable. It gave him great profit. It stood out against all the bad investments I had made throughout the years, those foolish speculations for material gains, producing only anxiety, disappointment, and frustration. That all this savings, the money savings in the bank or in property or in share marketing and all give me disappointment, tension, anxiety and all. But this investment that I made years before, that it became greatest profitable. How that this man now, the writer could save not the life of one person, but through that activity that young boy became a man, and he just got a profession. But more than that, he's spending his life for the other young people, saving the other young people, so that from one single activity, that good activity, the writer is getting back in the double or triple level. So that's why it says that it's the best investment that the writer ever made.